Thank you. As I think all of you, you signed up for it. The title of this program is How Do Humans Respond to Catastrophes, Myth and Fact? And I'm going to ask, I'd like to do a share screen and be able to go through some of the slide deck I have. So I will. I'm seeing it's host only. Am I able to do a share right now, Prakash?
Host. Try it again.
Okay. I'm just getting something that says advanced share options. It doesn't seem to want to let me actually share. Well, let me try this. Okay, I've got it. Yeah, there it goes. And how do I get to where it's just the slides themselves?
Go up where it says slideshow in the.
Yeah.
Yep.
Then am I able to?
Should we just click on it or then click on from the beginning, the next section down the far left. Go right with your arrow, with your mouse, go down and then go all the way over to the left.
Oh, got it. Thanks for everyone's patience. Some of us didn't grow up embedded with this stuff and find it a challenge. Again, the presentation. Just a quick overview. I'm going to go through a lot of material rather quickly for about the first half of the program, and then would like to transition into what I think might be an interesting exercise for everyone. We'll do some breakout sessions. So I will be going quite quickly. I would prefer to hold questions until we get through to the latter part of the program, where I think we could have some very interesting conversation. So I'm listing a couple of books, and I want to point out that the slide deck, for the PowerPoint will be made available to people. And my intention was, since I'll go through some of the material rather quickly, is that it be available for people at your convenience at another time. So these are 3 books that I highly recommend for anyone. They're informative, great human interest, and really teach people a lot about, just the realities that I think we as a society are increasingly heading for. Opening thoughts, society is obviously facing multiple challenges, but I think the important context to keep that in is that really presents opportunities for positive change, especially if people are ready to act when the opportunity arises. Disasters occur in many forms, and this presentation attempts to, give people some insights about their origins, realities, what to expect, and what you can actually do about them. And in the context of ideally prevention, but at least mitigation. And I guess a final point I'll make on this is that, while there's similarities between something major like capitalism, a major economic system collapse, with the other more traditional catastrophes, there are some significant differences about how those can occur and how to respond and recover and transition from them. Before I go to the next point, one of the major myths about emergency response is that people panic. So I'd like to have a show of hands about how many people think people respond poorly or respond well. So let's start with poorly. Just raise hands or something. and respond well. Bonus points, yes. Contrary to popular belief, and sad to say, especially with authorities, we as human beings do not panic, loot, descend into chaos, etc. The reality is that there's widespread positive, pro-social behavior. We help each other. The public rarely panics in a disaster, especially if they're kept informed. And I think this is another very important point. We aren't on our own when disaster strikes. Disasters are social experiences that elicit collective responses. And because this is the important, the preparedness, much more complex than preparing an individual. In other words, we have to prepare the entire community. I alluded to it earlier, and I think when we're talking about something that in many ways is construed as a negative, there is tremendous opportunity when disaster happens. And, they often unfold as if a revolution has already taken place. They demonstrate that, people demonstrate resilience and generosity, their willingness and ability to improvise, another kind of society. They demonstrate how deeply most of us desire connection, participation, altruism, and purposefulness. And one of the ironies, and this comes from Rebecca Solnit, one of the authors, is there's this sort of joy in disaster, which is very contrary to what people would suspect. But it's sort of the suspension of the usual and the opportunity people are free to live and act another way, and usually do. It reveals what else the world can be like, reveals the strength, hope, generosity, etc. of people. Mutual aid is actually a default behavior, with human beings. And especially, and I appreciate this part of this one line, civil society is something waiting in the wings when absent from the stage. And she kind of concludes with, they show us both what we want and what can be. Very quick overview of emergency management. You'll see many different lists about this. In my mind, this makes the most sense. Initially, risk assessment, mitigation, which can include adaptation, preparedness, response and recovery. And that's normally where it ends. And emergency management traditionally focuses on trying to get a community back to the pre-event normal. But I think from a Prout perspective, we would add, after recovery is also transition. It provides an opportunity to move into, a very different way of being. And the reality, and some of us have had experience with it locally. Some of us have been working with local officials on some of these issues. And sometimes, some people refer to the status quo as a disaster. So in and of itself, it may not be the best thing to get back to. But the other reality that we've been discovering is that in many cases, you simply can't get back to the previous normal. And so I think that's one of the realities to be aware of, and why, as Proutists, we are inclined to add the concept of transition. It provides an opportunity to move in a little bit different direction. I thought it was humorous, there's a huge genre of movies about disaster, and they usually start with some scientist warning about a danger, but being totally ignored, just the reality. I think a very useful distinction is to understand the difference between emergencies, disasters, and catastrophes. And, the reality of climate change and, just the seeming acceleration of more severe, more frequent events has forced emergency management as a science and approach to managing these challenges, has forced it to really start evolving much quicker than I think it had been in the past. And we're seeing some important changes in that regard. I'm going to go very quickly through this. Emergency or an accident, something minor. I think what helps put it in some kind of relative perspective, I'm going to sort of do a comparative thing. An example would be a single home fire. They're usually local, usually not a lot of, physical harm, some loss of property, but it's usually the local people that respond. The next level up is disaster. And I think the important thing to be aware of with disasters, they bring their own problems, but they actually tend to exacerbate old ones, food insecurity, homelessness, et cetera. And so in that sort of comparative sense, this would be something like where a fire actually burns a few city blocks, not just a single home. And then catastrophe, they're the worst of the worst. It's sort of one of those classic, you know it when you see it. It basically immediately overwhelms systems. It dominates international news. Death tolls tend to be staggering and very difficult to determine. And they must be managed very differently from disasters because they are different and much more complicated. And the example that I was sharing there is a wildfire burns an entire community. And again, that's been reality. I mean, Paradise, California, and a number of other communities that have actually burned to the ground. Some of the defining characteristics of a catastrophe, leadership is totally incapacitated. They're impacted themselves. They don't have the resources to respond. The impacts are substantial. First responders usually don't have the resources to address needs. So help has to come from outside. But one of the challenges is sometimes catastrophes are very widespread, a very huge areas impacted, and that exacerbates the challenges of logistical support and everything. And most of the critical infrastructure is impacted. I think the other thing that I'd like to touch on is, it's the classic, death by 1,000 cuts kind of problem. There are many small communities that have sort of relatively minor emergencies, but the reality is the frequency of those happening starts really wearing down the resilience and capacity of the community to respond. So in effect, they can become even a greater challenge for the local community. But the reality is, they're expending all their resources, and they remain largely on their own to try to address them. So it can be very difficult. I wanted to share a few insights from the authors of the books that I referenced at the beginning, and we'll continue to encourage people when you have a chance to track them down and dig into them a little bit. And just to put it in a little bit of context, she is a young PhD that is in some respects turning emergency management on its head. And I think it provides some useful insights. It's how she evolved to where she is, and also what young people are starting to think about and be concerned about. But she, at one point tumbled to the reality of disaster capitalism. I mean, she references Naomi Klein and shock doctrine, because she started realizing that the economic system, and climate change and systemic discrimination, et cetera, are all kind of interlinked. She points out, based on extensive experience of her own and others, government responses are, inadequate. Too little, too late is quite common. I appreciated this. Politicians, we always hear that we're going to build back better, and other kinds of innocuous phrases to that sort of direction, and she started hearing them as really a threat, because better does not mean better for everyone, and that's become one of her issues. Response reveals inequality, recovery reinforces and even deepens it. She has started some things addressing the climate justice movement. And climate change, she points out, it's a dual issue. At this point, prevention is still something people need to work on, but adaptation is also an important aspect of, trying to prepare communities and society for some of the things that are just inexorably coming at this point. Some of our other insights, floods are acts of God, but flood losses are acts of people. Disasters are largely preventable, or at least can be minimized. Studies have shown $1 spent on mitigation can save $6 in response and recovery. This is a point that I thought, it really caught my attention, and I'll explain where it's coming from. Every disaster you have yet to experience in your lifetime has already begun. And where that's coming from is, she said, the reality, and it's kind of back to flood losses, acts of people, is that over an extended period of time, people are making decisions that set up how, a community or an area will respond either positively and minimize crisis, or poorly. And, and so she's talking about that. And again, she references, that the disaster movies make it all seem very quick, but how you got to that point took a very extended period of time. Media coverage can be key, but largely fails. I mean, it's important for, accurate and relevant information, both inside and outside the disaster, to be moving around. And media seems to have the capacity to be anywhere, anytime. And so they could provide a real service. Second, disaster. This is a sad reality. It is what many survivors refer to their recovery experience. And again, it's because of inept, untimely, inappropriate government response. And the reality that many times it's a bureaucracy, which just by their very nature, poorly equipped to respond in a dynamic, changing situation. Disasters begin and end locally. I mean, the reality is the local survivors are the first people there. And the reality is they will be the last ones there when it's all over. And what happens in the middle varies according to, the severity of the challenge. There's a tendency for people to be generous and send all kinds of in-kind donations, which often they aren't the things needed, and create a warehousing problem for people already dealing with other stuff. So the reality is cash is best. It allows people managing the situation to actually purchase what people need. Risk has increased, more people living in more dangerous places, and in her opinion, preparation has not kept up at all. Some events are what disaster managers refer to as focusing events, and that's something sudden and dramatic. And it provides because it catches the attention of both the public and elected officials, policymakers. It presents an opportunity to maybe try and move the needle a little bit further toward a better way of responding. Again, she underscores climate change is here now. Fire year, not a fire season, rapid storm intensification just before landfall, and sunny day flooding, sea level rise, basically. Rebecca Solnit, amazing individual. I encourage you to track her book down as well. She talks about the possibility of paradises already within us as a default setting. She touches on the idea of elite panic. And that's basically people in power fear that the changes brought on by disaster, will, among a couple of things, that means chaos, destruction, and they're threatened by the possibility of it undermining their power, which ultimately can create a kind of power struggle among people that are actually on the ground doing what needs to be done, and officials coming in and in effect often subverting what was actually being productive. Solnit emphasizes that ideas matter, and they matter urgently. Consciousness changes due to significant disruptive events, and that can spawn changed beliefs, and I just make the reference, it can shift the Overton window to making things that heretofore weren't possible, not only possible, but maybe almost inexorable. I appreciate this insight. Rumor is the first rat to infest a disaster. Solnit also touches on media's crucial role. she said at its best, it's done, reporting is done with compassion, empathy, and accuracy. At its worst, it's repeating unsubstantiated sensational rumors. And I think in so many of these things, post-Katrina New Orleans is just a classical example. The looting actually was being done by the New Orleans Police Department more than the individuals. She touches on, I think it's an interesting idea that there are resemblances and ties between disaster and revolution. And, people that are opposed to a revolution see it as a disaster, but it is also a utopia of sorts. The two share aspects of solidarity, uncertainty, possibility, and most importantly, the upending of the rules and the opening of many doors. Convergence is something important to be aware of. And that is that the movement toward a disaster area is usually both quantitatively and qualitatively more significant than flight or evacuation from the scene of destruction. And I think a classical case, again, is New Orleans and what some refer to as the Cajun Navy, which was people traveling to New Orleans with their, boats and helping rescue people. She touches on, in her opinion, looting is an inflammatory, inexact word. And she, in her opinion, should be excised from the language because it tends to pull together two different things, what you may legitimately call theft, but on the other hand, is really requisitioning. And that's the logical, rational response to gathering necessary goods in an emergency. And in fact, some store managers, owners will actually open the doors and encourage that as just a way to help support. I appreciate this. When do you ever see the powers that be are failing in their duty? And when do you ever get the chance to move beyond being angry about it and actually do something concrete, tangible, and immediate? I also appreciate this insight that she shared from her interviewing so many people. The basic idea is to blur the lines between the people that are helping and those that need help, and blur that into a single community and get it being very cohesive. Her book is actually about significant past disasters, but it's really also about the future. Knowledge matters, and so do desire and belief. This next book, I won't spend too much time on this, but I'm curious, maybe a show of hands, how many of you read Lord of the Flies at some point? Yeah, I think many of us did. What's interesting, and he touches on this and provides the substantial documentation, that event actually happened later, but the outcome was very different from his book, and he makes some interesting comments about Golding as an individual, and then I think many of us have probably heard of the Stanford experiment with guards and prisoners. It was an attempt at trying to understand, Nazi Germany, et cetera. The Yale shock experiment, where some subjects were supposedly testing people and shocking them if they were incorrect, all the way up to administering doses that could be fatal. And then the sad story of stabbing of Kitty Genovese. Bregman's book really digs into the real story about all three of those. And it's very different from the urban legends about what happened and how people responded. Many of you probably know that Homo sapiens are part of the Homo genus. Bregman comes up with an interesting idea called the Homo puppy. And you might find that interesting. And basically, I think he will give you a very different perspective about human nature than some of those studies, those events, those books tend to portray about human beings. Some of his insights, in Catastrophes, we go back to our natural roots. The prevalence of altruism, cooperation, et cetera, happens in the wake of natural disasters. prejudice, hatred, racism stem from a lack of contact. And I think what that really underscores, you have to be engaged in the community. You have to be engaged with others to build trust and to build relationships. And that's, I think, essentially what he was trying to get at. And building that kind of cooperation, enhances the resilience of a community. This is probably a little bit off track, but I appreciate Twain's observation that travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness. I think that's probably true. Because bad behavior grabs our attention, where we click, the advertising dollars follow. So in his opinion, social media tends to amplify humanity's worst qualities. I think many of us have probably heard of the World War I, 1914 Christmas, when combatants on both sides of a horrible war got together and sang carols and treated each other as other human beings. And what I appreciated, one of the references to that, someone said, it's the sudden surfacing of the whole of an iceberg. And what it really was underscoring, and studies have been done about how many people that are in combat refuse to do harm. They've done studies how many people didn't even use their weapons. So it sort of suggests that many people just are simply not wired for war. He also has 10 rules to live by in his book. I will not spend any time on this. It's something you can refer to later, but it's the key points to put together, a viable, effective disaster warning. I will touch on a few things that people can do. Homework, understand emergency management basics, read, find out what your community's emergency plans are. Most of them at this point have some kind of plan. Have reserve supplies, enough for you and to share with others, in your neighborhood. Get engaged. There's all kinds of tools out there. Map Your Neighborhood is a program that's used I know in a few communities here in Oregon, but it's a program to get connected with your neighbors, to identify who has what skills or special needs or anything like that, just to build that kind of relationship. I encourage people to get to know elected officials and municipal staff that are focused on emergency management. Offer to help. Some of us here in Eugene have had great success with meeting with elected officials and being able to provide support for them that they just simply don't have the resources to acquire. Be active in neighborhood associations and in your community. Some of us have had experience with tabletop exercises, basically a reality simulation to better, it grounds you in what you really need to understand about what is needed, how to build systematic approaches to address challenges. And practice makes responding much easier. It's kind of like a muscle. It's like muscle memory. It's kind of mental memory that you, oh yeah, this is what we can do. Essentially to try and build community resilience. And a couple of things that are important to understand, and this was very poignantly pointed out to a few of us working with local officials, trying to rebuild some communities that were destroyed by fire a couple of years ago in our part of the state here in Oregon. And that's that there's just along with the obvious loss of property, injury, and even death, the people that are there are just very traumatized. And so people need to be prepared to, address well-being issues. How do you help people through, just catastrophic experiences? And I think finally, a community will survive. And if there's a significant disruption, there's actually a chance that it can become more self-reliant, equitable, and resilient coming out of it if people are ready to act. What I'd like to do is spend the balance of this program, and I apologize, I'm going through a lot of things very quickly, but I'd like to have a breakout session, and basically what I'm asking people to do, and we'll figure out how many sessions to break out into. But to give some thought to what are the emergencies, disasters, or catastrophes most likely to happen where you live. And maybe even if you're willing to venture a guess, how soon, how frequently, if it's fairly minor stuff. And then kind of give some thought to what you propose to do about, just starting to prepare yourself in your community to respond in a systematic and organized way to those disruptions. And then what I'll ask each group to maybe identify someone willing to take notes and be prepared to share, the salient points that came out in the discussion. And then we'll come back together, share those reports, and have an opportunity for discussion and Q&A. And at that point, some of us can share some of the experiences that may be edifying or useful for others to hear about. So I will ask Prakash at this
How many
point.
groups? We have 21 people.
Yeah, let's do 3 groups. Does that sound good to everyone? A group of 7 of you?
Okay,
Depends. How long do we have?
10 minutes.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's
More
go for
groups, I
10
think.
minutes.
Yeah, 10 minutes. If we're doing 10 minutes, we should have fewer people in a group.
Agreed.
So what is should we do 4 groups? Because that'd be more like 4 or 5 or 5 people on average.
Okay.
Yes, yeah, let's do 4. Yeah, the concern I have is then reporting out starts taking more time, but yes, I look forward to what the groups come up with.
How long are we going to have to report out?
We have the balance of the session then to report out. We'll see what the actual time is, so we divide up what the remainder is. And some of us may be willing to remain after words to continue conversations.
We keep shrinking.
You want to go into a group, Pretender, John?
I don't know. Can I move around between groups, or is that difficult? And are
yeah.
the people still on the screen not in groups?
This is group number 2.
Oh, okay, so I'm in a group.
Oh, everybody else just went away.
Right.
Prakash, what happened?
I'm seeing 3 groups. Are there actually 4? Or is
1,
there...
2, 3, and 4. But I'm not sure exactly, because the only person not in a group is you and myself, I guess. But
And I'm not in a group anymore.
yeah, it's weird because it says you're in group. Let's see.
What I'm seeing on the screen is room 1, 2, and 3, and each of those is 4 people.
I'm fine just leaving it. I don't want to disrupt anything. Just leave it. It's fine.
So I'm not even seeing the 4th group listed, or 4th room.
Yeah, and there's 4 people in there.
Huh.
And
Oh, wait. Yeah, now, yeah, I can just slide it down and see.
it says you're supposed to be in group room 4, but you just didn't choose to join. But
You were in it and then you bumped out. You want to go back into it?
I was in group number 2.
I've been trying to put you in groups, but somehow there must be a message popping up that you're not seeing.
You're inviting me now to group number 3, but I was originally in group number 2. But I don't want to join at this point. It's too late. It'll interrupt their flow.
Okay.
that's okay. Hey, while I have you here, Jitendra, what's the name of Bregman's book?
It is Humankind, a Hopeful History.
Thank you. 2 words, humankind?
It's all run together as one word.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and then Disasterology by Samantha Montano and
Yeah.
A Paradise Built in Hell.
Yeah.
Thanks for all the help, Prakash.
Yeah, I don't know what happened about it. Because it was somehow from the very beginning, it wasn't a valid
Yeah,
group, and I don't know how
Link.
that happens.
yeah, it's a tough discovery minutes before it's supposed to start. I'm impressed we got that many people. I'm afraid some may be tried.
Well, this is about, we normally get somewhere between a half and 60% of the registrants. So we're at 30 people registered and we've got 21. We have 70%.
Yeah, yeah.
So how much, Ashrita was just asking as we were jumping to the next thing, how much time will there be for the reporting out portion?
Well, if we have 4 groups, boy, we're probably gonna have to have them do like 3 minutes. I mean, that's why I was thinking bigger groups, because yeah, we start. And I might have run a couple minutes longer than I wanted to. I think we got a little bit of a slow start.
Yeah.
Difficulties. I think we probably need to ask people, because it's gonna be, what, about quarter till? When we come out, is there a timer that you can see, Prakash?
I think if you're in the group, it shows.
I would guess there's about 4 minutes remaining.
Our local paper just had a map showing that the island that we live on. And
Yes.
It doesn't show me. It's set for 10, I think. It's weird.
We could run a few minutes over because we got a late start.
Yeah, what I think I'll do is maybe ask people to try and keep it to 3 or 4 minutes in the report out, and just see if people are willing to if it runs a little bit over, if they're willing to stay, and so everyone has a chance to share. And then I'll be willing to stay on if people have other questions or concerns, you know.
But there was a part that you said at the end, which sounded so rich, which was to have a discussion.
Yeah,
about.
yeah,
By the way, did you see Claire Oliver's in the room with that?
yeah, I did, yeah,
Yeah.
that was great. Yeah, I'm working with him. He's doing the next presentation.
You said he's doing one in August.
Yeah,
And
there's
then you
somebody-
said that the Amert one was in August. I think you meant September.
yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, I was wrong. Yeah, it's September, and then Ayers is in October.
I was part of the conference.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and then we want to try to get Sabode maybe in January.
Yeah, in fact, I have to track down the address, his address, so I wanted to reach out to him and start some conversation about maybe when he'd be available.
So a new person's joining us, Margaret.
Jitendra, you should have his contact from some emails that you and I had
Yeah.
going back and forth.
Yeah, no, I just have to go back and find it.
Oh, from
I
Italy.
can send it to you.
Yeah, if you could do that, that'd be great.
Will do. I think we should probably gather people. Can you send out like that people have X number of
The system automatically reminds people that when there's a minute left.
And how much is left?
I don't know. It doesn't show me. I joined a group and it doesn't show. It used to show, and I'm not seeing it.
Well, I thought maybe as the host, when you set it up, you'd see it. The time.
Yeah, because I can't find, when I'm setting it up, there's nothing in where the setup that says.
My concern is that if the timer's not on, people are gonna just stay in there too long.
I've never seen it not show 1 minute left when there's a minute. And if I closed all the rooms right now, it would give them a minute. It doesn't automatically end.
Why don't you do that? Because it's 5:47.
Okay.
Otherwise, there's just not gonna be enough time for reporting out.
Yeah. Yeah, so in other words, when you close it, then it starts the 1 minute warning to.
All right, so they'll be getting the 1 minute warning now.
Okay.
Margaret, people are in a breakout session, but we're all coming back together in a minute.
This Margaret from Italy.
Don't know.
There's a Margaret registered from Italy. Supriya.
It's late for Margaret then.
Yeah.
We appreciate your participating.
Here we go.
Welcome back, everyone. At this point, we're going to have to limit it. So we have 4 groups. So to do report out, probably can only allow like 3 to 4 minutes for each. And that might run us a little overtime if people are willing to stick around. And then myself, and if there are others who would like to continue any kind of conversation, discussion, I'm willing to stay on for a while longer. And can share other information if people are interested. But let's go ahead and start with group 1. Who is reporting out?
Goodness. Does anybody know the number of their group?
No,
Who's in group 1?
Madam Fernanda, Garish, James, and Jerry.
Yeah, right.
Well, Donna volunteered to give our synopsis.
no, I didn't.
Well, you didn't say
Very
it during the group,
clever.
guy. Come on, pick it out, right?
Jump on it, Jerry. Go ahead. Can you do?
No, this is Donna's gig. He's the one that sat there and listened to everybody else. So that's his thing.
Well, I'll just very briefly, we won't even take the 3 minutes, is that a lot of us were pretty blessed in living in some pretty nice areas. Flooding might affect people. Maybe severe ice storms might affect people. Maybe the grid going down for various reasons, things like that. But most of us weren't in like earthquake areas or areas that would be severely affected by hurricanes or even by tornadoes.
Climate migration was mentioned as a risk.
Yeah, there was migration of people moving in to beautiful places. Yeah. And some of us, and we discussed a little bit about survivalship, keeping ourselves and our community going by planning ahead with sort of solar and our own electric, and I'm sure there was much more that people were doing with things like their gardens and food. We'll leave it
Great.
at that, John.
Yeah, thank you. That was great. Group 2, maybe. My experience is usually it tells you what group you're in, but maybe not.
Jacqueline, I think, was speaking for us.
Are we two? Oh, okay. Sushan volunteered me to take notes, so yeah. You know, there were 4 of us, Alex, Sushan, and Chitra, and 2 of us live in North Carolina, Alex in Maine, and Chitra in Ho Chi Minh City. And all 4 of us really kind of had to search for what might be considered any kind of disaster that has impacted our communities, which again, you know, like Jarisha, however we pronounce your name, like you said, we're very blessed. And so, I mean, they ranged from, you know, potential flooding, storms, those sorts of things in North Carolina. And Chitra mentioned, you know, the COVID, you know, cycle that we all went through that put a lot of strain on their communities, as it did all of ours, I guess. And Alex said, fishermen have a bad catch sometimes, and then they get the complaint about it. So that shows you, you know, how little we've been impacted by disasters. And we didn't, you know, the 10 minutes went so fast, we were going to go back to like a what if scenario, but we never got to that. So that's about it.
People are taking notes about where they may want to relocate to here.
Asheville. It's pretty cool. Donna would know too. Yeah.
You'll have more fun in the coast of Maine.
Okay, I won't argue.
Even if the fishing isn't good sometime.
Yeah.
But just don't buy property on the waterfront.
Okay, you're right about that.
Buy it inland and it may be the waterfront, right?
Okay, group 3.
Who's that?
Doris,
That's you, Shri.
Sri.
Good evening. Okay, I'm just going to read my report. So I started off in Mid-Coast, Maine. Recently, our county was declared a disaster. Actually, it was statewide, countywide, and then a federal disaster was declared on December 23rd last year, and then April 30th through May 1st of this year from precipitation and flooding and the storm surge involved that blew out roads and culverts and damaged businesses and infrastructure on the coast and roads. The second one was both inland and on the coast. And one of the things I'm doing is working with a bunch of municipalities to help them plan for infrastructure development, climate adaptation. And just tonight, I met with a group to explain how to communicate the difference between sea level rise, storm surge, and flooding from precipitation, so they can engage with their neighbors to help plan, get community support for infrastructure. Mark lives 6,000 feet above sea level in the Gila Wilderness, and experiences forest fire, grass fires spread from the nearby ranches. And one of the things he's been doing is working on the food supply and engaging with the community on permaculture and resource mapping to address food distribution, connecting separate food projects to meet the need for food on a temporary basis. Doris and Claire live in Everett, Washington, 45 minutes north of Seattle and about 100 miles south of Canada, and experience the wildfire smoke. So it's wildfire and flooding, and they're also waiting for the next big earthquake, which could be as large as 9 on the Richter scale, which creates a tsunami risk. And so one of the things that they're doing is just nurturing neighborhood connections and trying to be prepared at home to avoid burdening the recovery efforts. Tapon lives in Delaware, and a tornado struck nearby in the last few days. Several folks lost their roof, but there was no warning, while several days before there was a warning and people were encouraged to go to their basement. He's not really sure how to prepare when something hits so rapidly And it was noted that tornadoes are expanding both north and east, and this is something more of us may need to think about.
Great report. Thank you. Group 4.
Nada lives in Westchester, 1 million people, extreme wealth disparity. Some of the richest people in the US live there, whereas 20% also need access to food on periodic basis. There's flooding, there's drought, there's minor earthquakes, and there's major disruptions to power. So what she's done is she's taken, I think you said, CERT emergency course. So she's getting trained, and she also has been in the community long enough that she knows who the leaders are. She knows who to call. Alberta, I think I have that right. There's worry in her area about earthquakes, but she says the real concern is wildfires. And what she's done is she's taken a course called Community-Driven Recovery and Transition Training. And she learned in that course that lots of times people think we need to train individuals, but she said the course taught her that it's the community that needs to be trained to respond to a disaster. And she added that this course helped her to understand that it's a disaster that could catalyze neo-humanists into changing the world to the proud way of managing. And she's connected also with recovery people in Lane County. They came to the course, someone in Lane County came to the course, and also Transition US. And Jody has 5 kids, and she says preparedness is a day-to-day thing. She knows how to move immediately into action. She has a very large basement filled full of food and other resources. And recently, in fact, when a friend of hers needed to set up a home, they did it from the resources she has in her basement. So that's my report.
Excellent.
I'd like to hire you as my note taker, Eva.
Thank you.
I think those are great reports. It's interesting that the diversity of anticipated challenges, depending on where people are. You know, and I think Dada maybe alluded to it. If another area gets impacted, then the potential for your area to experience a lot of inbound people who've lost homes and careers and a lot of other things. You know, at one point I was living in Texas, and New Orleans, Katrina, Houston displaced a huge number of people that ended up in where I was in San Antonio. I think the other thing that is interesting is that sometimes that displacement becomes permanent. You know, for example, New Orleans, there many people have gone back, but many have never returned. Paradise, California, it remains a real challenge. I know a person. I asked her once, you know, do you still have a lot of property there? And she said, I have a lot that's contaminated, and it costs a fortune just to do the remediation to even have it be useful. But you know, one of the things, and Alberta and I have worked together in Eugene, and one of the things that was discovered with Blue River, a small community that was devastated by the Holiday Farm fire about 3 years ago now. They are the poster child for you can't always even build back with the best of intentions. And one of the realities they discovered, it's an unincorporated community. Most of the properties were grandparented in before any kind of restrictions on code or anything like that. And so now for those people to rebuild, it's cost prohibitive. I mean, they simply can't afford to build again. And there are all kinds of crazy catch-22s. There was a business owner that had a laundromat, And there's a sort of wiggle room. Oregon, for those not familiar with it, had some very restrictive land use laws that limited urban sprawl, and helped maintain rural areas. Now is starting to cause some impediments to needed growth. But if you're unincorporated, you're under Oregon State land use codes. And one of the wiggle room areas was an owner of a business could rebuild it, but it had to be the same business. And the person that owned the laundromat, that's no longer a real demand area, but he can't build another business in that location. So, there are multiple challenges like that present impediments to people rebuilding. I'd be curious if anyone has questions they'd like to ask. Some of us have been actively engaged with local officials addressing some of these issues. Some of us have gone through the CDRT. It was a tabletop exercise in how to respond to a catastrophic situation. But I'd be willing to entertain any questions or comments people would like to share.
Yeah, John, I heard that at Blue River, because it was unincorporated, it was hard for money to get in because there was no place to send the money to. They weren't incorporated, so there was no one to receive this funds. Was that true? And did that ever get fixed or anything?
It's difficult because, and those of us that have worked with Lane County, which is where Eugene and Springfield, the primary urban centers are in that county, they are responsible for Blue River. And what they discovered is when you're unincorporated, you have no formal governmental structure. So there's no contact that you can take the funds to for distribution. So yeah, those are some of the catch-22s. Alberta, maybe.
Yeah, I can add to that. The person that Lane County hired a contact who became the conduit, and they had to look for the community leader. They determined that it was the pastor who had the most access to people, and he became the de facto municipal government, if you will. So yes, it took them a long time to actually there was money there from Lane County and from the state, but it took them a long time to actually get the money to the community. 18 months in, they finally got funding through EWEB, to get them a wastewater treatment plant that actually, because their wastewater treatment was demolished. And that meant that people who worked there were living in their trucks for 18 months. And many of the owners of the homes that were for rent sold them to people looking for second homes. So people are living in their trucks, and then there's other people building second homes. And that's what the community, so it exacerbated the different.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, in Blue River, 600 properties were destroyed. As of right now, 160 of those have been sold to people that are building second homes or short-term rentals, displacing, the local residents who, as Alberta's saying, they're living in their trucks out behind the ranger station while they build these homes for other people.
And they need to be building multifamily dwellings, and the land use urban sprawl prevents them from doing that building. And the constituency that would be lobbying the state, because as John said, it's the state that's governing them, given that they have no municipality. The land use laws prevent them from building multifamily housing, which is actually what they need. Prout would fix that.
Is Oregon a home rule state?
I don't believe
Tell us,
so.
tell us more, Sheree. Tell us what a home rule state is.
Maine is a home rule state, which means that local ordinances can be developed that are more specific than state governance.
It's not. It's not. There are only a couple of industries. It's not a very diverse state. So the lumbering industry has an outsized influence on what gets passed. I will say one other, there is one other thing. Well, I'll let you go, James.
James.
This has been a great discussion. I think it does lead to a follow-up discussion, probably along the lines of home rule, for example. In other words, how do communities actually organize to make the decisions that are necessary, both preventative and in terms of adaptation? And how does that happen on an ongoing basis? And how does it happen with any kind of scope where it's actually not just a one-off, but it's an ongoing conversation, and there's a bit of infrastructure built around this this idea of being able to, do this more on a self-governing kind of platform, so that these ideas could actually go into implementation, in a quicker way.
I'll call on Mark in just a second. It brings to mind that what people have discovered in significant catastrophic situations is there's this kind of spontaneous response that develops a lot of that kind of capacity and caregiving, et cetera. And then usually the officials come in and disrupt all that. So yeah, so how do you sustain a rational and appropriate response in the face of elite fears that Solnit talks about, and just institutional inertia that just can't respond. But Mark, you have a thought.
Yes, I think that the important answer to all this is to have a long-range plan well set ahead. And so that when a disaster strikes, the plan based on neo-humanistic concepts can be put into effect. And what I use as an example on the lowest end of the scale would be New Orleans, where here you had a disaster waiting to happen. It happened, and no one had a plan except to try to rebuild what was there and put in more pumps and higher dikes and the rest. The other example on the other side did not come from a disaster, but Brasilia, which is the capital of Brazil, was they declared this vacant area to be the next capital in 1956, and they built a whole new city in 44 months. There were 3 architects that did the master plan and 1 landscape architect, and it was done from the air. It's in the shape of an airplane, with certain sectors for business, government, housing, etc. And some of the creative ideas, for example, is all the apartment blocks. The first floor is 1 floor up, and under it is open space so that pedestrians don't have to go around buildings, around blocks. They can go diagonally through the city. And also the street system was planned to maximize municipal bus uses in terms of east-west communication. So having a far-reaching plan that's humanistic and neo-humanistic is really the long-term solution.
Exactly.
It occurred to me as we've been talking about a different kind of disaster that impacts where I live, Asheville, but many cities and communities. across the US, and that's a lack of affordable housing. And so it's not something that comes, like a hurricane or something, but it's an ongoing literal disaster for increasing numbers of people. And of course, it's exacerbated by weather issues. I mean, winter comes and you've got people living on the street. And I don't know what else to say about that at this point. My community has really taken this on to try to manage it, but I don't think, and that's, I think, the most we can hope for at this point, because affordable housing is simply not available here in Asheville, nor is it in most places, and becoming less available as time goes on. So it's a whole different kind of it's not a catastrophe, like a hurricane, but it's definitely a disaster. I think that's increasing. And the disaster management people in Asheville, are here to deal with floods and those sorts of things. I don't know that anybody is treating it on the level of being a disaster, but
well, that underscores that concept that disaster exacerbates problems that already exist, and often the people least capable in terms of resources or opportunities to respond to terrible disruption are the most impacted, and just one of the sad realities of that. But yeah, no, you've identified a critical thing. I mean, food insecurity is an issue for many people in the richest country on earth. It's James, you have something else?
No, sorry, I didn't lower my hand.
Any other thoughts, comments, questions? Yeah, Alberta.
I think it's worth emphasizing the problem associated with recovery, the long-term recovery, that response, as John was saying, people actually behave in a cooperative neo-humanistic way. And so that's all an opportunity for us. But the reality right now is what we saw in Blue River. There were 800 volunteers that wanted to help after the fire, and 6 weeks later there were 8 people left because they weren't really able to, they didn't have systems and to identify the skill set and deploy that level of volunteers. So actually this organization, maybe John's going as well, to co-ed community organizations available during disasters to try to solve that. But that's a common problem that that Montano actually talked about in her book.
We have the program that I'm working within for disaster preparedness and climate adaptation mitigation is called the Community Resilience Partnership. And those of us who are working as service providers to the municipalities are experiencing and recognizing burnout and the very real need for us to build in personal relationships and become a part of and interact with the community as community members, and not always the person providing the service, but as the community member engaging in a reciprocal process. And so I'm in the beginning phases of organizing a psychosomatic weaving gathering for those of us who are practitioners to really just kind of unpack that. And so often we get into, I talk, you sit and listen scenarios where it doesn't, people are already experiencing stress because we're talking about disaster or emergency or hazard mitigation or, stressful topics. People need the chance to kind of engage in the good old fashioned eating together, dancing together, singing together, breathing together, and recognizing that it's okay to do that, getting outside of our academic and professional mindset and actually just moving into being together.
Excellent point. Alex.
This has been a pretty interesting discussion and a lot of pretty important points brought up. I'm very kind of, my ears perked up really hearing more about, but we didn't really go into a lot of detail, the exacerbation of that inequalities and already disparate circumstances are greatly exaggerated and exacerbated oftentimes during a crisis, a disaster, and even more so in the aftermath. And I think that as we kind of are moving into an era of growing epidemics of various disasters, nature and potentially, greater distortions in the economy, leading to a variety of situations where, with COVID, we saw the collapse of the supply chain on some essential items. And I think that this is a pretty rich field to have a different kind of perspective, to open up another avenue to discuss about alternative solutions. And I appreciate the discussion. That's all.
Thank you. Yeah, I think one of the things that as you dig into some of the thinking within, evolving emergency management is recognizing, and Montano touches on this, that sometimes a disaster is happening and it's not even registering. In a way, that's what Jacqueline brought up. Housing is an urgent crisis for virtually everyone at all price points, except maybe the uber wealthy. COVID for Montano was a sleeper for her. She thought, oh, public health, they'll take care of it. And in her assessment, how the government handled the COVID epidemic was just catastrophic. It was just a complete failure in so many ways. And so I think there are things that she said, it's sort of the thing, if you're not looking for it, you don't see it, is almost that kind of proverbial blind spot. And there, housing is clearly a slow motion disaster. And so I don't know if people would be interested in hearing about the CDRT that we just recently completed and are trying to put into some kind of final report format. But I think those of us that participated in it found it very interesting and very informative, and in my mind underscored how little prepared we actually are if you create a real disaster scenario, and pretty soon it's easy to get overwhelmed. But and I guess one of the things that some of us had envisioned is that is a way for communities to start really getting their arms around what does that really look like. Even some of you appear to be blessed in areas where the immediate threat of kind of natural disaster isn't nearly as great as where others live. But your challenge may be, how do you accommodate a large influx of immigrants, climate refugees,
especially if there are affordable housing issues already.
Yeah, you're stacking that on top of a challenge that already exists, and also to kind of what Alex was touching on, the inherent systemic discrimination that's happening, across the country, and again, the disasters, impact that, and recovery often amplifies it, strengthens it in many ways. I mean, New Orleans is a classic case. The the flooding was intentional. I mean, a lot of people may not know that, but the levees were dynamited just to prevent flooding in areas that were higher value areas. And so places like the lower Ninth Ward were, and it happened so fast that, you know, there were so many casualties because people simply didn't have the wherewithal, the capacity to leave or to even get to safety. So, and, you know, so yeah, there's, you know, sometimes people in critical roles tend to think in self-serving ways. But I do want to be sensitive to, I mean, some of us have been engaged in this effort to really understand this, because again, we see it as one of the catalysts that could trigger opportunities to really evolve into different ways of society being. And so some of us have made it an area of focus that we're really trying to understand and better prepare ourselves. And part of our long range vision is to try and start producing guides or materials. I mean, many people have probably encountered pattern language at times in the past. And, you know, I mean, a system that originated in the field of architecture, but has been adopted elsewhere. And some of us see, you know, is there a way to create a cookbook that helps communities, areas systematically assess where they're at and actually employ, you know, good solutions to the problems, the challenges that they're facing. And, you know, and one of the key people that started pattern language in architecture, one of the things that appealed to me about it was his vision was to address the asymmetry of knowledge. You know, that he was trying to help create a system where individual, ordinary people, he called them, could actually design their own homes, their own workplaces, their communities for that matter, and not rely on a professional, you know, like a paid architect to do that work for them. And so I think, you know, that could be a productive area, is to how do we help ordinary people prepare and be ready to, you know, and to build the resilience in their local communities. I was trying to be merciful, and I could probably talk for hours about some of the things that we've been engaged in and some of the studies, but just really wanted to give a quick overview of a field that I think people need to be aware of. Even I think for people in areas where maybe the risk of natural disaster isn't so great, but financial collapse is also possible, you know, and that will have significant ramifications of a different sort in many cases. I mean, that kind of disaster may leave a lot of, you know, capital infrastructure in place, but who's going to run this sewage treatment plant, the water distribution system, the energy power plant, et cetera? Mark, did you have a comment?
Yeah, in my area, I'm getting involved in a project to build, they've located 5 acres of land to build small homes, 200, 300 square foot homes out of adobe blocks. And adobe is available here. And an adobe block making machine, 2 of them have been located. So it takes care of affordable housing. And also it's a durable housing that could survive wildfires, etc. So I'm always looking towards people who are doing innovative projects that can address things in the future. On that same tone, were there progressive people in New Orleans? They should be doing what Brazil did in 1956, which is to plan a whole new city on higher ground. So the next time they get flooded, which is almost a surety, they just move to higher ground. Brasilia was built in 44 months. So with the proper kinds of housing for different kinds of people, etc.
Great point.
I have an offering. I don't know if you see my hand. Can I jump
I
in?
do, yeah, please.
One of the things I've found that people doing the resilience work and community engagement work that I've described, their doorway into Prout has been very easy when I describe the 4 principles of economic democracy. And we actually have I think we have legs under us to apply for grant funding to use the 4 principles of economic democracy to develop actual performance evaluation metrics to determine if a project is being conducted with DEIJA or not. Diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and access. And it really highlights, the 3rd principle really highlights the importance of decision making and what is it and who's making it and what is the process. And so one of the things that I've just recently been doing with municipalities is going through what is the decision making process. And it's amazing when you come up and you find the topic comes up and you find out that different people have different assumptions about what words mean, and getting that figured out in advance has really allowed for the group to gel with kind of a shared appreciation of protecting the group of the energy so that they can work together.
We may need to have you do a seminar. Yeah, I think some of the dynamic work you're doing up in Maine is outstanding.
I'd be thrilled for the other states to take on the program that I'm working within. It really came from our governor. She's not a saint by any means, but establishing a Maine Climate Council and coming up with a climate plan and then putting funding into the state budget to get community members to engage with municipalities to help increase their capacity has been really successful.
Yeah. Well, and Mainers are a fiercely independent lot, in my experience, and I think there's a collective community sentiment there sometimes.
We're fiercely interdependent. Someone's going to show up with their big old truck when there's a storm to see if you need a generator. Your neighbors.
Absolutely essential. And I think that's sort of one of the real clear bottom lines some of us have come to is it's essential to be engaged. If you're not, the way I always looked at it is if I'm at the table, then Prout's at the table. I bring that awareness with me, and I don't even have to identify it as such, but it has an impact, it has an influence. And but you have to be out there, you have to be meeting with people, you have to be engaged, you need to know your community. And I think what some of us have discovered is, elected officials, well, maybe more accurately, some of the staff, the professional staff that really run things, often feel like they're in a squirrel cage. They're usually underfunded, understaffed, and they've just got this laundry list of boxes they have to check. What's an updated fire plan now? What's an updated, evacuation plan? And so they are hungry for help, for people to come in and just say, hey, what can I do? How can we help out? And some of us have the luxury of now being retired and bringing a wealth of professional experience from a lifetime of work, and the ability to come in and say, here I am, how can we help? And so I think that's another thing, it reveals my generational cohort, which I belong to, but it's a reality. I think some friends said that there was an epidemic of retirement happening among some of us more senior folks, but it's making some resources, experience available in communities that sorely need it and simply don't have the resources to buy it in the open market. Yeah, Mark.
I'd like to retire the word retired and substitute the word repurposed.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for any of us that have managed to cross that threshold, the rumors are true about you're even busier than you were when you were a professional and, in your day job.
How is that possible? Oh, sorry.
The one redeeming feature that some people have pointed out is, unlike maybe your day job, you at least now are doing the things you want to do or feel compelled to do rather
And
than.
if you're doing your passion, then you really put a lot of yourself into it. And, it's different. That's all I can say.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's the reality. But again, I want to be sensitive. Some of you, it's getting late. And so I appreciated the conversation afterwards and apologize for the early on glitch and starting a little bit late, but really appreciated the participation and active conversation. I think it was very useful. And I think James touched on something. At some point, we maybe need to reconvene a gathering to pursue some of these things a little bit more. And I think there would be some interest in that because, reality is happening, and it's not encouraging. I mean, it seems like every day you're hearing about some other kind of challenge for some part of the country or part of the world. And the trends are not encouraging. But thank you all for your time this evening and for your active participation. It's genuinely appreciated.